And
Right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in just about a minute. But for those of you who are on the call, we love to create that sense of community. So why don't you put in the chat your name, where you work, and what part of the country you do your work in. So, perhaps there's someone in a neighboring community who's like, hey, this person's there too. Let's work together or cry on each other's shoulder. I don't know. There's a range between that. How are you doing today, Claire?
doing good. Speaking of weather, we had an event yesterday outside. It was an open house and it was, 98. And I didn't wear sunscreen. So I'm feeling a little tired today. Just got like zonked by nonstop sweat, but otherwise doing good.
I know I'm sunburned. I'm like, I didn't think I could get sunburned, but I could. And
Same.
I,
Yeah.
well, it is the top of the hour. Welcome everybody to our weekly community conversation. I'm really looking forward to this call for a few different reasons. One of them is I get to co-host it with my pal Claire. And the panelists that we have today are just some really incredible folks who have such a range of experiences and wisdoms that I know that we're all going to be lucky enough to learn from. And when we initially were conceiving of what topic to do, one of the things that influenced and informed this topic is the fact that many of us are having conversations with leaders and staff members and volunteers and rescuers. And a lot of what is at the center of a lot of these conversations is just the challenge of navigating change, navigating, the uncertainty and how that affects the people that are in these different ecosystems. And so we really thought today is all about that wisdom, community wisdom. That's why it's titled Wisdom from Animal Wellbeing Leaders on Navigating Change. And so you'll hear from these three different leaders on just different scenarios and different things that they've learned over the years. But to kick us off, we of course have the question of the day, thanks to one of our panelists, Geraldine. And that question is, what has changed in your life between last week and this week? Claire, what has changed in your life between last week and this week?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I was just talking to my dad the other day and we were talking about his retirement and where he's going to live, and I thought he had this whole plan in Texas and now it might be outside of the state. So it's a lot of change. So we're working through that. Gosh, and a lot at work. Always, every day, something is changing. We're launching a new program or new strategy. So I tend to pace my day week to week, or pace my schedule week to week, day by day, because I've found that if I get set in a certain way, it's always changing. How about you? Has anything changed?
Other than I'm a few shades darker, let's see, what has changed for me this week? Well, I feel like I have some projects that are ending. I have some new projects that are kicking off this week. So that's really exciting for me. But I'm like you. I think it's like I'm more of like a week to week. I used to be someone who the idea of having like a 5 year plan that was, distincted down to the week and the day, was very part of my type A personality or how I conditioned myself. And that doesn't serve my nervous system anymore. And so now I'm more of like, okay, what am I doing this week, next week? And then I try and like plan it a few months maybe. But let's
Yeah,
see.
I agree. Life's easier when you can just roll with the punches.
So we got some trips in here. Someone said they turned a year older. Happy birthday for anyone who experienced a birthday between last week and this week. Ooh, someone said not much, but that can be good. Yes. Sometimes, like one time my therapist said, it's okay to just settle in things being fine. You don't have to like create chaos in order to feel like normal. And I'm like, ooh, that's a deep thing that we're going to spend years on. Side of my therapy, Claire, let's talk about some national updates.
Absolutely. I'm seeing some really good, huge success too. I just wanted to do a quick shout out, Marnie. I see you launched Kitten College as a national organization. Congrats. That's a lot to happen in a week.
Yep.
But yes, we're going to move it along to national updates. So if anybody has any national updates, if you could unmute now, you don't mind just keeping it under a minute so we can get through everyone. And if you don't want to unmute, you can throw it in the chat. But we'll open it up now for anyone who has national updates.
Hey, I'm going to go ahead and jump in for Maddie's Fund. We have this Wednesday a very interesting and important webcast with Dr. Julie Levy and Marnie Russ from McKitton College. And if you don't know who Julie Levy is, Google, because she's like the cat expert. And they're going to talk about all the advancements in neonatal kitten care. But in addition to that, sort out what's true and not true. So I hope you can join us. The link is in the chat. Thanks.
This is Irene from Maddie's Fund also, and just a reminder that community conversations will be on hiatus for the month of July. We'll resume on the first week of August. Thank you.
Thanks, Irene.
Any other national updates? Last call. All right, it's been quiet lately. Okay. Oh, thanks, Allison. Yes, we are taking, that is a big update, a hiatus in July. So the next community conversation will be August 5th, Monday. So enjoy your summer break, everyone. But I am so excited to go into our break after this topic because it's, like Jose was saying, so timely. I think all of us can connect to it on one level. Or not. And so the lesson, the title is Lesson Learned: Wisdom from Animal Wellbeing Leaders on Navigating Change. We have 3 speakers that I have followed for a while and look up to for guidance and advice. And so it's going to be a wonderful panel. They're going to talk through managing transitions. They're going to talk through their lived experiences, some of their greatest challenges, and provide insights on leading their teams through uncertainty. And we're going to get some practical advice. So I think you all are in for a treat. It's going to be wonderful. We have 3 speakers. We have our human and animal welfare consultant, Geraldine De Silva, Chief Programs Officer from Humane Rescue Alliance, Bobby Mann, and Chief of Shelter Medicine at Humane Society of Silicon Valley, Dr. Cristie Kamiya. So welcome, you 3. Thank you for being here. So excited to hand it over. And I think, Geraldine, you're going to kick it off.
Thank you, Claire and Bobby, and thanks to Maddie for helping us have these kinds of conversations, which are so important. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm happy to be here with Bobby and Dr. Kamiya as co-panelists. And today I'm just going to look at the bigger picture and talk about the 2 ends of the spectrum of navigating change. I want to talk about when I started my career in the corporate world as an entry-level staff and how I was part of a change that was being navigated, and then go into how I was leading an organization and navigated change. So when I was in India and I was just out of college in an advertising agency, we were going through a merger with a multi-billion-dollar international agency. And with that came a lot of change because we had branch offices in several metropolitan cities in India. So it wasn't just that the leadership was trying to navigate change within the branch office that I was a part of, but it was across the country. And it was a very mindful way in which they did it. It was very engaging with all levels of staff. And then they integrated all of the different branches together. So one of the things they did before the big change happened was that they held a retreat for all of the staff. And Allison, if you could just show the slide, they actually branded the retreat called Drishti. And Drishti means vision. And with that, it gave all of us a focus on looking at each other as part of the whole, and that we were a team working together, irrespective of whether we were working without change or whether there was change to come. So when we were all aligned, we were able to focus on what the leadership was guiding us to do. And we were able to build trust in the leadership because we realized that they valued our input and they were gathering information from everyone, and they really took time to listen to all of us. So it was very much a spirit of inclusion, which I carried forward with me. And when we merged with this multi-billion dollar agency, it was quite seamless considering that we were such a large organization spread out across the country. So fast forward, when I was leading a nonprofit here in San Diego, many gray hairs later, I embodied all of those values that I saw in my leadership because I felt inclusion, adaptability, engaging with the staff, irrespective of whatever level they were, was very, very important. And also, I realized that our leaders brought their own core values of integrity and transparency and even their vulnerability while managing all of this risk in a merger with them. So I tried to sort of imbibe that when we were merging with a larger organization here in San Diego. And I recognized that my team consisted of different parts. There were like our donors who were a team, there were our volunteers. I even looked at our clients and, of course, our staff. And I realized that my team, they were experts in their field, and I often deferred to them for advice because I knew I didn't have all of the answers. And that was also something that I learned from my former leadership. So I think, like, as we lead, we need to always recognize that we're accountable for our decisions, and our team and those that we are working with are always looking to the style of our leadership, the core values that we're bringing into our leadership, and all of that. So some of the things we looked at when we were going through a merger was, the whole risk management of it all. We gathered input from all of the stakeholders, like I said, from our volunteers and donors. We even went to founding board members because we knew that they had been with the organization supporting us for so long, and we valued their support and their input. We did our due diligence, where we made sure that we had all our I's dotted, and all, like, everything was taken care of. And then we also came up with a contingency plan because we thought, like, if this whole merger doesn't come through, like, what are we going to do? So it's always good to have a buffer so that you're protecting your team as well. And through all of that, I recognized that we needed to advocate for our team members because it was a vulnerable time for all of us. We were going through a big change where we were dissolving the nonprofit. The board had to resign. The team had to resign before we were hired by the new organization. So there were a lot of moving parts. And then I realized my vulnerability and my lack of also knowledge, because it was the first time I was leading an organization through a nonprofit. Through a merger, I apologize. And so I engaged an executive coach to guide me through the final steps because it involved legalities that I was not aware of, because when you dissolve a nonprofit, there are lots of legalities. And so I was able to get the support that I needed through a very challenging time, but it was worth it. And so, some lessons learned were like, we need to understand who our audience is and direct our messaging appropriately. We need to be very transparent because everyone's listening and they know when we're being honest and when we're leading with integrity. Explain to your team when you don't have the answers, and let them know when you're advocating for them. They need to know that you have their back, and meet them where they're at. Because all of us, I recognized in my team, we were all going through different life sort of things in the background, in addition to the merger that was happening. So we kind of met each other where we're at, and they met me where I was at as well. And of course, creating a culture of inclusion, irrespective of change, where you can build trust, will help you get your team and your organization through anything. And, it's good to have like a mini strategic plan just for your team or your program always, so that you have that as a backup, so that it's always aligning with whatever change there is. And so just to sort of round off, I just wanted to, bring in an analogy, because when I was thinking about this presentation, I was in my garden and going over it, and I saw these bees like sort of pollinating like in a Matahila poppy. And it reminded me of all of us who are like bees. We're working as a team, we're a community. And then I took it further, thinking, as our programs are growing, there are these little bees that are pollinating and spreading all the pollen in other gardens, and our programs are growing like that. And our leadership is not necessarily like the queen bee, but it could be. But we need all the support, like fertilizer and watering and sunlight or shade, and you need to adapt to whatever the plants need. And I thought that as our programs grow in different cities or different communities, our garden could look different depending on the flowers in those gardens and the way those bees have brought different pollen into those gardens. And I thought that that could be a nice takeaway for all of us to realize and recognize that not everything has to look the same. And, we're all bees working together as little communities. And my daughter actually reminded me that bees are like little communities. So I just wanted to leave it at that.
Oh my gosh, Geraldine, you're always just leaving us with such thoughtful information. And I personally think you're the queen bee. That's just me saying. May have a little bit of bias, but thank you so much for setting the tone. And thank you to Jose and Claire and the rest of the Maddie's team for inviting me to talk about this. By no means do I consider myself a change management expert. I've just had the privilege to be a part of a lot of change and to learn from that change and make mistakes with that change and try to just become a better leader day by day. So before I go into a bit more of the tactical part of change management and provide a couple tools and resources, I actually want to hold some space for the group here. Can you all use the chat and take a moment and describe something that you are going through change management with, whether it's a program or a strategy or a vision? I'd love to just hear from you on some of the challenges or opportunities that you're facing right now. So I will pause and hopefully we can populate the chat a little bit. Donor CRM, that's a big change. Formalize instant processes, yep. Fundraising, philanthropy, leadership transition, that's always huge. LMS, learning management softwares, culture change, absolutely. Volunteer change management. Oh my gosh, so many great things. Operational overhaul, that is a big lift. Diversity, equity, inclusion, absolutely. Volunteer campaign, this is great. Look at this. Facilities, new roof, HVAC, beginning a capital campaign, that is quite a journey. Yeah, keep them coming, folks. Thank you so much. I think this is really important for us to remember that we're not alone in these challenges that we're dealing with. But I think something that was really important for me in my shift of thinking when I talk about change management is often for me, especially early on in my career, growing up in the animal well-being space, we have this sense of urgency because we have this responsibility, right? We've also often been ingrained in us that there are lives at stake and there's space concerns and there's community needs and there's so many stakeholders that need us, and there's only so much in our cups. And so oftentimes we are forced, because of the environments we have created, to be quite reactive in the way that we manage our change. And oftentimes the concept of change revolves around implementation of a program or a strategy, right? Success is getting that thing implemented. Success is launching that lost and found program. Success is hiring the animal care technician so you have enough people to be able to clean up the kennels. But what I have learned through my time is actually separating myself from the goal or the outcome and remembering that change management is actually the people part of the work. It's really about not only bringing people along, but what are you doing to provide them the tools and resources to be successful at that change? And so one of the things that I wanted to provide, which was helpful for me, was a model of change management. And this model is called the ADKAR model. And the reason why I wanted you all to individually put some of the things that you're dealing with currently in your change management, I want you to visualize and think about your scenario based off of this model. And please take a screenshot of this, take it home with you, and do your own research. But I felt like this was a great way to come full circle with what change management means to me, at least. So the first part of change management is awareness, right? For me, is are individuals even aware change needs to happen? Because oftentimes, right, at a leadership level, we are looking at things from 50,000 feet. We are looking at the entire organization. We're looking at the entire budget. We're having conversations with the community that other staff members aren't able to have. And most people, oftentimes, if they're showing up to work, tend to be quite happy in their day-to-day, right? And so when you are saying, hey, we're going to shift, I'm using this example, from just housing animals to being a community-centric organization, right? Oftentimes people are like, but our animals are happy and we're making an impact and I'm doing this day to day. And what you're envisioning is going to disrupt or change what my daily life is going to look like. So I think the first part of this is providing awareness that this change is coming or that there is a need for this change, and be able to express that change through the lens or the words of the people who are actually going to be affected by that change. Because if you cannot do that and you have not gone to that level, then you're not actually setting your people up for success. The second part of it, as I had mentioned a little earlier, is the desire to change, right? This is where the why comes in. It's when you have to inform or educate the organization about the changes, the awareness that you've made, you have to make sure that it's not just fulfilling for you or your mission or your vision, but for the entire organization, right? It's not always going to be perfect. There is going to be friction, but you have to try to find some level of why, right? And I think when we talked about this in the example of a community-based sheltering model, right? Although people might feel that the animals are cared for and they're well taken care of, we remind them that success is that animals never have to enter the facility, right? And that keeping families together is our primary goal. And if we can do more of that community work, then there'll be less animals to care for in our shelters, hopefully. I know our data is not showing that. I know that we're really full, but ultimately we hope that we'll have a better opportunity to care for the animals within our facility and long-term try to keep them out. And so if you can talk to your staff and create a desire to change, right? You're going to have less friction in that change management. And remember, not every single person is going to be bought in. And one of the things that can really set you up for success is finding early adopters and that desire for change. Because a top-down approach doesn't always have trust, right? I know a lot of folks that are in larger organizations, you can't say that you've had soft touches or confidence with every person within your organization, but you might have supervisors or directors or managers that do have those sorts of relationships. And so if you find people that have that desire early on, make sure you tap into them, you listen to them, you take feedback from them on what the desire for the rest of the organization is. And if you take that feedback in, you can definitely support a more successful change management. Now, once you have people having desire, the next thing that they're going to need is knowledge, right? What information do they actually need to start implementing this change within the organization? Do they have, the SOPs, as some of you are talking about? Do they have the knowledge of how to communicate with the organization and externally and internally with stakeholders? Because our customer service folks are the first ones that have to answer those calls. So if you focus on the knowledge here, you're going to help yourself be more successful in this change management. The next part of this is the ability, right? Do they have all of the tools and resources available? Have you set up FAQ documents? If you're going to change the way that you're going to clean the kennels, have you provided the new cleaning solutions and the tools and the things that you're going to use to scrub those kennels? Do they actually have everything that they need readily available? Because you've already spread the awareness and you already have created the desire. You've told them what they need to do, and now you're giving them the things they need to be able to do it. And lastly, even once you've done all of those things, your job is not done. Because just as we talk about with enrichment, about creating new behaviors, you have to constantly reinforce those changes that are happening. Because as we all know, in times of crisis, in times of challenge, it's very easy to revert back to what we've been comfortable with. So if you are providing incentives, if you are reinforcing it by acknowledging the great work that they're doing, if you're sending constant memos about how this change is actually improving the impact of the work, long term, this change will then become their norms. And so if you were to follow a method like this, these things don't happen overnight, but with this holistic approach, you're going to set yourself up for a much better chance of success. And Allison, we'll go to next slide, please. The last thing that I want to remind folks is this isn't one of those pick your strategy sort of menus where you can choose one or two things and it'll still make a recipe. This is a holistic approach, because if you do not do all of these things, even if they're not perfect, you're really going to set yourself up for failure. And this is actually a tool that Jose shared with me recently, which I really loved, which was shared with him by Heidi Marston from PetSmart Charities, which I thought gave a really great visual of what just missing one of these components can do, right? At the top, we talk about if you have your vision, you give the skills, the incentives, the resources, and action plan, you're going to be successful. But what happens if you just miss giving the vision, but the other things? You're going to have a confused staff, right? If you give the vision and some of the others, but you miss the skills, you're going to have an anxious staff, because although they may want to do these things, they're not going to have the skills or competencies to do their work successfully, which we know can cause a lot of stress and anxiety. If you don't incentivize this, you're going to have resistance. Because remember, people often are very comfortable in their ways, and you really have to make sure that you give them not only the tools, but the positive reinforcement to show them and guide them to where you want to be. If you don't give people the resources, you're going to have a very frustrated team, because if they're bought in and they believe in it and they even have the skills and abilities, but you don't invest into them, you should expect them to be frustrated. And frankly, you should deserve that frustration, right? Because if you're trying to do too many things where you don't have the resources to do them and you choose not to invest in those resources, you're not actually creating a scalable model. And the last thing is the action plan. You know, oftentimes as a visionary leader, I tend to put myself in this bucket. I sort of see the big picture and have the expectation of people to follow me along. But without clearly documenting this roadmap and giving people the confidence to have something tangible to follow, you're really not going to set yourself up for your best foot forward. So here are a couple of tools that have been helpful in my career. And now, Dr. Kamiya, I'd love to toss to you for you to talk about some of these scenarios in your professional career.
Thanks, Bobby and Geraldine. And I love that you're talking about the people part, because I think that is the most important. So some of my the biggest learnings, I don't have slides. I was hoping to make this more of a conversation type thing, and so I guess in order to understand the change management and my thought process now, we need to go back in time a little bit. So I started at HSSV in 2012, and I had just finished the UC Davis Shelter Medicine residency program. The ASV guidelines had just been published a couple of years prior to that. And during the residency, we do a lot of consulting, and you go in and make recommendations and provide instructions in a framework and guidelines for how to implement, but you don't actually get to implement a lot of those recommendations. And when I started at HSSV, I was like, cool, awesome. This will be the ultimate consult. I can make all the recommendations and then I could actually implement them. How hard can this be? 18 months tops. I got this. Here I am, 12 years later, still working on it. So, some of the biggest learnings is change is really, really hard. It is really, really hard. And you can create change in many different ways. You can direct change. You can make people do change, and they will do it. But it's so much more effective to inspire people to make the changes than to really force them into doing it. And that's the part that is so important. If you want engaged staff, you want people to stick around, you want people to come along with what you're doing, and you want them to have a connection to all of this. Like, you really need to focus on the people. And we really can't talk about change management without talking about organizational culture. What are the values of the organization? And why do you exist? What do you do? How does all of this fit in? So when I started in this position, it was a very interesting organization where there's a lot of really good work happening. But I also had this idea in my head where HSSV could be the model shelter. Like we could be the shelter that everyone sort of looks to, and there's no reason for us not to get there. We're in a very privileged, very fortunate position where we have resources, we have people. We're in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of really smart people out here. How do we take all of these things, which seems to be like this perfect combination, perfect storm of all of these different components to create something that's really cool and unique and not something that you see very often in the animal welfare space. And so at that time we had this framework for change management. It was John Cotter's 8-step framework, and it had been published, talked about, and that was a framework we used. The organization at that time, we were not as collaborative. There was some siloing going on in different organizations. I think that's a pretty common thing in a lot of organizations. And so the question was, well, how do we get everyone on the same page, and how do we get everyone to have the same goal and to work towards the same thing? And that was hard. We went from having 0 operations management meetings ever to doing that on a regular basis. We had these ASV guidelines that we wanted to implement, and how are we going to do that? How do we engage everyone and get the buy-in? And so having this tool, this framework to work through was super helpful to learn how to collaborate, learn how to work together, learn how to change, to make changes, to make sustainable changes. And as I was thinking about how to put this talk together, like what to talk about today, the first thing that I thought about was that 8-step framework from John Cotter. But then this concept in this framework is over a decade old. And so the question I had was, well, is this really relevant? We had the pandemic, and that threw a wrench in everything. Everything was turned upside down, as y'all know. And it was a really fascinating thing to sort of take a few steps back and just witness and watch. There were people who surprised you. There were people who you thought were super resilient, who had their stuff together, and they were going to rise to the top, and they were going to help keep our organization moving. And I was surprised that some of those people weren't. They didn't in the same way expected. And in a similar fashion, you had people who you wouldn't have expected to rise to the occasion, and they did. And so the question was like, why? Like, what's going on here? Like, it was a really interesting, fascinating thing where people have different thresholds for stress, the fight or flight response. And what the cool thing, though, I mean, if there is any cool, or if there's any, I guess there are positives having gone through that, is that there were some opportunities, some silver linings there to do things differently in the shelter, where all of a sudden you have an empty shelter, you have all these people with not a lot to do. How can we use that as an opportunity to try new things, to learn new things, and to create new processes, or finally get to that project that's been on the back burner for the past 3 years and get that done. And so that was really cool too. And I talk about the 8-step framework. That was super helpful for us in the very beginning as we learned how to do this. And over time, that actually, the whole change management, the communication collaboration, that actually became ingrained in our culture to the point where it comes pretty naturally, where we are a very collaborative organization now. And problem solving is the first thing, is what we do. And one of the challenges we have now, however, is that things are different. The problems we're trying to solve for are different than they were pre-pandemic. We had like this whole shift in strategy, it seemed, and so then the question was like, well, how do we do this quicker without going through the incremental steps, of the 8-step framework? And because that takes a really long time of creating that urgency, of building the coalition, the guiding coalition, and to create the vision and communicate the vision and all of these things. That takes a long time, but we want to be adaptable. We want to be able to pivot. And so then how do we do that? But having learned all of the things in the past, we went straight to the people. So the ASV guidelines, the second edition, has the 5 domains of animal welfare as its framework. And all of the different domains kind of lead up into the mental state of the animal. And ultimately, with the guidelines, that's what we want. We want them to be in a good mental state. And that is the exact parallel we want for people. How are you going to make changes if they are so stressed out of their mind, trying to finish all of the things on their checkboxes? They're not going to listen to any changes. They're not going to be able to focus on any of those things. And so there was a shift in really focusing on that, focusing on our people. How are they doing? Where are they at? What kind of support can we provide to get them in a place where we can even introduce the concept of change? And so that's kind of where we still do utilize some of the elements in that 8-step framework for larger changes, for things that we do have time for. Some of the more immediate stuff, like in 8 weeks, we're going to run out of buprenorphine extended release because they're no longer making it. Okay, what are we going to use in its place? And who's going to do it? Who's going to make those changes? How are we going to implement those changes? And what are we going to do? And so having people who are already engaged, who are already used to that problem solving mode, and who are able to, I guess, thrive in this unknown situation. And I think a lot of that is empowering people. And like my management style, leadership style, like I'm not a dictator, and I don't ever make any unilateral decisions with my staff. And most of the decisions, most of the problem solving is driven by, well, what are we trying to solve for? What is the issue that we're faced with? And getting people involved in the decision making, and getting people involved and feeling comfortable to provide their input, and especially providing input when they disagree with you. And when I see someone disagreeing with me, like, I've done my job. Like, I mean, that is really cool, because there's enough trust, and there's enough safety to express what you're truly feeling, and not just going along with it. And we are still a work in progress. There's still a lot of changes happening, and I think maybe changing the term from change management to maybe change leadership. I don't know, because management feels so much like you're managing someone and you're putting parameters around. I don't know, that it just feels like that. But anyway, that's what we're doing, and be happy to answer questions, or if anyone else has inputs and stories.
I just
Thank
wanted to add
you.
that was amazing.
Yes.
So I just wanted to add something about, like, the whole bureaucracy that's also part of organizations, and how, it could sometimes or oftentimes is looked at as something negative, and it doesn't have to be that way, because the whole bureaucracy involves and includes, like, SOPs and systems and processes, and when you're going through a change, those things change as well. So it's really like about how you communicate that change and prepare the teams for the changes in the SOPs and why they're happening, so nobody's blindsided. And I think that's such an important part of, like, accepting feedback, like what Dr. Kamiya was saying, and just addressing it while change is happening, so then nobody's sort of opposed to this bureaucracy, and they don't see it as a negative thing.
I totally agree with you. And looking at it from someone else's perspective and looking at it from your staff's perspective, to them, they're like, you're just making more work for me. You're just adding more stuff to my already full plate. What's in it for me? Why should I change? Why should I do this? It's just going to make life harder. And so I mean, that part of the communication and the whys behind we're doing this, and their involvement, and providing the resources, as Bobby mentioned before, is super important. If you're going to give them more work, you need to take something away.
It's so awesome listening to all three of you share your perspectives, because so many of them round each other out, and then there's different perspectives. Like, I loved what you were saying, Dr. Kamiya, about, here's the model and it's great, but also sometimes you just need to, like, use your own wisdom and your own learnings from the past to inform where you're going. And then I look at, what you were sharing, Bobby, like, that chart that I shared with you, that Heidi shared with me, it is so helpful, because I'm like, oh, it makes sense. There isn't an incentive here. That's why there's this. And an incentive is just something that motivates someone. Sometimes people hear incentive, they think money right away, and they're like, we don't have that. But for many of us, we're actually motivated by impact, by connection, by working with community, by helping animals. So it's about tying the incentive to what your team cares about, what certain departments care about. Because that's, like, for some, yeah, it might be pizza. For others, it's like, no, I want to help me understand how this change is going to shift to the thing that I care about, and that might be impact. But let's see, Claire, do we have any questions in the chat for our panelists?
I don't think I see any a lot of engagement though, and a lot of comments. I have a question I was just interested in. Do you all use this model, would you say, because I see, like, when people were sharing their changes for the last week, some are seemingly smaller and others much larger. Would you say that you use a similar framework, like, to help you make those tough decisions? And then I guess it's a two-part question. And then when faced with resistance, or, the people that, even if you go through all your steps and you check off the boxes, there are some people, as Bobby mentioned, that won't always get on board. I'm interested to hear how much attention you might spend on that. So it's a lot of questions, but anyway, just interested in getting your feedback on small and big change, and then how to deal with the resistance piece.
I can start with, I'll start backwards. I'll start with the resistance piece. So it's really important with any type of change, if there is resistance, there's pushback, to identify why. What are the reasons people are pushing back? Why don't people want to use this new software, for example? Is it because it's too hard, or is it because there's a flaw in the process that we created, or is there just a fundamental difference in philosophy? Or so there could be a lot of different reasons. And we actually did this in one of the changes that we did made that was with software, and we did receive a lot of resistance to that. And what we discovered in just talking to people and talking to staff who are trialing, doing the beta version or whatever, and asking them, like, what is happening? And it was because their part of the process was taking longer. So they went from taking maybe 3 minutes to now they're taking 5 or 6 minutes. And so anytime you add a minute to a surgery, that's going to make a longer day. And that was the pushback. And so then we had to go back and explain, well, when you're making an overall efficiency in an end-to-end process, there might be some sub-optimization of a couple of different steps in order to gain the larger efficiency of the entire beginning to end. And it was a concept that was really difficult for staff to understand. This is going to take me a few minutes longer in this step because I have to enter stuff into this iPad. But what does this mean for the overall picture? This means that we don't have double entry into 2 different software products. And this is going to overall increase the productivity and increase the efficiency. You're going to have more time at the end of the day to do all of your duties because you're not wasting your time doing all this other stuff. And so, and if we hadn't investigated that, if we hadn't gotten that feedback of why that pushback, they could easily have been discounted as, well, they're just lazy or they're just bad employees or whatever reasons that we play in our heads. And so, and there's numerous examples of that in pretty much every change that we make. But if you are dealing with someone who is not aligned with your overall mission, your vision, your goals, and they're not aligned philosophically, then that's going to create friction and potentially undermine what you're trying to do. And then the question there is like, well, are they in the right organization? Are they in the right position? Or start questioning those things. And sometimes the best option is separation, is to have someone else in that spot, and making sure that you have all the right people in the right seats on the bus.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that also, to talk about like how, it's good to make small changes first rather than like one big change, so people can slowly like get on board. And then also to sort of recognize that, if you have no resistance whatsoever, you need to recognize what kind of resistance it is. Like if people are just questioning it for the better of the mission, and welcome that, because if you're just surrounded by a group of yes people who are just agreeing to everything you say, that's not productive either. And then when you're talking about change, if you're only talking to your team, the impact of that change is going to impact other teams as well. So it's good to step out of your circle and talk to people who are in other teams and get their input as well, so that it makes this whole experience that much richer and more well informed.
It's a really thoughtful question, Claire. So my head went to a couple different places, and one of the places it went to is like, before I could actually start making informed decisions, I needed to identify sort of what type of employee or person I was, right? Like, am I someone who loves change? Do I thrive in that area? And it wasn't just how I perceived myself, but I had to take really critical feedback from people who I directly support as well, because my actions directly affect them, which trickle to their team. And what I had learned is like, because of the environment that I came from, especially going from doing work with Haas and American Pets Alive, having all of these calls all the time, I came from a place where we were moving so quickly in so many different places into an organization, right, that has one central ecosystem. And I had to deprogram myself from one environment to another to be able to be a good leader within this new space, because not every environment is created equal, right? And so I had to take really critical feedback from my team that's like, hey, you're moving too fast and you're causing disruption and people aren't happy with it. And I had to own that, because it is, as a leader, your responsibility to not only own it, take accountability, but to make positive changes to be a better leader, to create more comfort and consistency for your team. And so that's something I had to learn. And the other sort of mantra that I have built, and it goes back to your question about, do I use the same model regardless of the size of the change that's happening? I actually have another element that I take into consideration there. It's like, how much time do I have to implement that change, right? And so I try to move at the speed of trust, is what I try to say. And early on, right, before I have that trust built, it may take more time. And if I have that time readily available to me, even if it's a small change, I should invest that time, whether it's active listening, taking feedback, testing and piloting, surveying, before even small changes happen, right? Because incrementally over time, that trust will build, and there is going to come a time where you're going to have to make hard pivots. And even for small changes, if you do the work when you have the time, it may give you more grace and space when you may have to make big changes more swiftly.
I love the wisdom up until the final second of the call. Thank you so much to my co-host, to our panelists, and to the entire Maddie's team for making this happen. There was another question in the chat. Let's take this conversation over to the forum. If you have any other questions for our panelists relating to this, thank the three of you so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom. I think there's so much. I'm definitely going to listen to this recording because there was tidbits that were so helpful from each of you, and we value you so much and for making the time for this community. So enjoy your month off of these calls. May you maybe keep that hour on your calendar to just do something for yourself, to do some self-reflection, whatever it is. And we'll see y'all back the first week of August. Be well.